Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. On today's program, host Casey Hinches begins the process of bringing our tropical plants inside for the winter. We have tips on planting bulbs for spring color. Casey takes the pain out of moving cacti and succulents, and we plant a cover crop on our Hugelkultur. Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance is provided by TLC, Oklahoma's leading garden center, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, Tulsa's source for great gardens, southwoodgardencenter.com. and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing.
It's fall in Oklahoma, which means one day it's 90 degrees and the next day it's 50 degrees. And while we acclimate to cooler temperatures, our plants are doing the same. And we need to start thinking about transitioning our tropical plants to bring them indoors. Inside, they're going to receive a lot less light. And so what you're going to want to do is start to bring your plants under a shade tree or a covered porch of some sort so that they start experiencing those climates that they're going to have inside. You want to do this over about a week's time so that they slowly adjust. Even the amount of sunlight that they'll receive in the shade outside is far more than they're going to receive inside. So this will be a nice adjustment for them. We also are not going to need to water them as much or fertilize them as often because the plants really won't be as actively growing as they are in the summertime. Now, the other thing you want to think about is pest control. When we bring our plants in, we want to make sure that we're not bringing any unwanted pests. So you want to check any new growth, especially the underside of leaves as well, because those tend to be where your pests will hide. If you do find something, you want to make sure you're treating that with some insecticidal soap. This is safe to use inside, so it's worth going ahead and investing in some because this is what you could use throughout those winter months if something comes along. And it takes care of most of your common houseplant problems. The other thing, while you're at the garden center, you want to think about if you need trays. If your container that you're bringing in doesn't have a tray to catch that water, or if you've just been having it on the patio and watering the plants, you want to make sure that there is something to catch that water because you don't want to ruin your windowsills or your tables. What I like is to get some of these larger serving trays to kind of hold several small plants as well. So we're going to take this after a week's time. After they've transitioned, we'll take them inside. When we bring these inside, we want to go ahead and give them a bath. If they're in a decorative container such as this one actually does not have any holes in it, we want to take the pot that they're planted in out and put them in a bathtub, or a kitchen sink will work also, and give them a nice shower. One thing you want to do though is prevent any soil from washing out is to get some tin foil and just push that around those plants, and that'll kind of help buffer some of that water so that it doesn't wash your soil out. Like I said, you can do this in a bathtub with a shower or a kitchen sink, and you want your water to be tepid and not a strong stream, but something kind of gentle to help wash off those leaves. There's a lot of times dust that will accumulate on the leaves, and this is a great way to help rinse them. They look better, glossier, plus it will help the plant photosynthesize more also. This works for all of your tropical foliage plants, but you don't want to do some plants such as your succulents or some of your hairy leafed plants such as begonias and African violets. They really don't like to have this much water on them. After you've done that, you're going to take the tin foil out, and you can let them drain in the kitchen sink or the bathtub, which is a nice feature. But we're going to take this back over here and start to think about where we're going to place these in our house. You want to make sure they're in a sunny location because, again, a sunny window is still not as much sunlight as what it was typically getting outside. You want to put it in a location that is consistent with the temperature. So you want to avoid drafty locations such as doors where the cooler temperatures might come in when you open those doors, and also around any vents. You don't want that hot, dry air to be blowing on these plants because that will quickly dry them out. If you put it next to a sunny window, you might not want to put it right up against the window because as the temperatures drop in the wintertime, it can get drafty near windows, and also that foliage might be resting on the glass, and a temperature of 40 degrees can actually damage tropical foliage plants. If you have plants that need a lot of humidity, you want to think about a microclimate for these plants. A plant like an orchid likes a lot of humidity, and you can do that by provide that humidity with a spray bottle and just spray the plant if you want, and that will give it some added humidity. Or you can create like a water tray here. And we've just got some decorative pebbles that we've put in a tray, and this will hold water. And so as we do that, you're actually creating a microclimate that you can then set your plant on. And as that water evaporates, it'll add to the humidity there at that plant. If you don't want to fuss with all of this, just think about the microclimates that might be existing already in your home. Kitchens and bathrooms, if they're sunny enough, they tend to have a lot more humidity in them because that's where we use more water more often. I know it might be nice outside right now, it might be 90 degrees, but it's inevitable that the temperatures, the cooler temperatures are coming, and you don't want to be caught off guard. So start that transition on your tropicals now. To plant bulbs, and no matter what type of bulb you might be planting, there's a lot of similarities to know about bulbs when you're speaking in general terms, and today we're going to go over some of those. First of all, a lot of times when you hear about planting spring bulbs, you might hear about top dressing with bone meal. Bone meal is a great phosphorus fertilizer, and this helps with root stimulation and root growth. Really, this is what you're wanting to promote through the wintertime. That's why we plant bulbs in the fall, is so that they'll have that opportunity to establish themselves. Now, how do we plant those? Well, there's a few tools that you might look at getting, and here we have a 4-inch bulb planter, and you simply push this down into the ground and spin it and pull it out, and it helps pull some of that soil out so that you can easily place your bulb in that hole. We also have a dibble here. It's basically just a spike that you stab into the ground, and you can kind of work it around to make that hole bigger. Or you have your hand trowel. Now, a lot of hand trowels anymore are made with a marker on here so you can see how deep you're burying your bulb. So how deep should you bury your bulbs? That's a pretty common question that we get a lot of times. It depends really on the size of the bulbs. And now if you have daffodils, let's say this is about a 2-inch bulb, you're going to plant most bulbs in general 2 to 3 times the diameter of the bulb. So if this is 2 inches, you're going to plant this about 4 to 6 inches deep in the ground. Now, and a crocus is much smaller. It's only about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. So you're going to plant this about 2 inches to 3 inches deep in the ground. So that kind of gives you a little idea. Of course, most bulbs, when you buy them, they probably have recommendations, and you should check those because there are some exceptions to the rule, such as stem rooting lilies. They like to be planted much deeper, and Madonna lilies, they actually like to be planted just below the soil surface. So here you can see we have our bulb, and most of them have roots coming out from one end and a point on the other end. The flat part where the roots are coming from, this is known as the basal plate. And this is the growing point of a bulb where you have your roots coming from the bottom, and this bulb tissue is actually vegetative tissue. So this is where your leaves and your flowers are going to come from. You always want to make sure that you're planting this in the right direction, so roots go down and the point goes up in the hole. Now, a lot of times when you're looking at bulbs, they'll offer different sizes, and you might find the exact same daffodil, but it be priced differently, and that's usually because of the size of the bulb that you're purchasing. Typically, when we're talking about bulbs, the bigger the bulb, the more flower you're going to get out of that bulb. The smaller the bulb, the less flower, either the size of the flower or the number of flowers you're going to get out of that bulb. So if you want to spend the extra money to get more of a bouquet, then that's up to you. Now, when we're talking about tulips, they're often categorized by their bloom time. You might hear early single, mid-season, Darwin, or single late or double late. Typically in Oklahoma, you want to get the mid-season or the Darwin or the single late. Those tend to be the ones that do the best with our spring when it arrives. You can do the earlier ones, but you never know how long winter's going to hold on, and sometimes that can affect your display. It just means that they're going to bloom sooner, and so if we have a heavy rainstorm or a snowstorm, you might lose your blooms sooner. The other thing is when you're looking at bulbs, you want to make sure that they are in good condition. If there's any large lacerations on them, that could be a problem with them developing rot or diseases later on. The other thing is you kind of want to squeeze them and make sure that they're firm. They shouldn't be soft or mushy. If you've had some left over and you've had them in your garage or something and they're soft and mushy, or they're so dehydrated, they're not going to have enough energy to produce a plant for you next year. Typically when we're buying spring bulbs, you might also hear about chilling those bulbs, or you can possibly order pre-chilled bulbs. Here in Oklahoma, we don't usually need to buy pre-chilled bulbs because our winters get cold enough. Bulbs typically need 18 weeks of 35 to 50 degrees in order to develop that flower. It's actually a biochemical response in that bulb that initiates that flower development. So if we plant them in the fall, it goes through the winter, it gets that chilling naturally, and then that's what causes them to bloom in the springtime. Not all bulbs need to be chilled. You're probably familiar with the amaryllis and some tropical narcissus such as the paper whites. These don't actually need to be chilled, and this is why you see them often sold around Christmas time as Christmas gifts, because you can put those into a pot and they will soon develop that flower. Bulbs are readily available this time of the year in a lot of your garden centers, and I would highly suggest you use them. They're great for outside in the garden in the spring or in your home at Christmas time. Here at the Botanical Gardens, we have a patio garden that we often display a lot of our succulents and cacti. But now in the fall, it's time to start bringing those that aren't hardy inside. And a lot of times we have to actually dig them up and replant them in a pot for the greenhouse. So today, because this can be a prickly task, we're going to talk about some easy ways to handle succulents and cactus. This here is a large golden barrel cactus, and one way to kind of handle that a little bit better is to get a rubber hose, or if you have an old garden hose, then you can use that. But it gives you a bit of a handle. Plus these long leather rose pruning gloves come in handy as well. So it allows you just to kind of handle a little bit better so that you don't get stabbed with these. Now, the other thing about cactus to know is that they can be a little deceiving. This one might not look quite that large, but it is very heavy because they're full of water. In addition, their potting media that we use is got a lot of aggregate gravel and grit in it, and so that tends to be heavier than some of your potting soils. The other thing to know is some of these softer, fuzzier looking cacti tend to be even more dangerous than the ones that have large, coarse spines. And that's because these, when they get in your skin, they're almost like fiberglass, and it's hard to find out where they are to remove them out of your skin, whereas this, it's like a thorn that you can pull out more easily. The other things to use for large cacti is a moving blanket, especially if you're going to put them on a dolly or something like that. Old carpet scraps are helpful as well. Sometimes other succulents can be just as dangerous to handle. Here we have an agave, and while it's not a cactus, it is a succulent that has sharp points to it. You can see here it's almost like a needle at the point of the leaf, as well as along the margins it has really sharp points. And it's good just to be aware of where those points are when you're handling it. And one way to kind of highlight it is just to get some styrofoam and put on the ends so that you can kind of see it. The other thing you can do is, if you don't have styrofoam, is you can just clip those ends. It's not going to do any damage to them, but it'll make it more of a blunt point for you. We're going to transplant some smaller cactus here. You can see the pot that they were in broke earlier this summer, and so unlike other plants, you typically don't want the roots to dry out. But with cacti, that is not a problem, and in fact it helps to callus over those roots, because if you were to transplant them immediately, sometimes those roots are damaged, and when you put them in there and you do water them a little bit, not too much, but sometimes that can lead to rot. So allowing these roots to dry in the air will callus over those roots and make them less susceptible. You can see here that I'm using barbecue tongs, which is a nice tool rather than using your hands to handle these. Another tool to use is just folded up newspaper. You can see here we have a prickly cactus in there, and using newspaper is a great way to hold those in place. So our potting media that we're going to use here is a mix of different things. We're not going to use just straight potting media because that would hold too much moisture for these plants. But instead we're using calcined clay, we're using vermiculite, coarse sand, some grit, and some pine bark fines. These are small pine bark. So this mixture will give us this mix. It's very coarse, and what's great about this is it allows a lot of drainage. We've also mixed in some micro and macro nutrients as well, because typically you do want some nutrients in there. It's not just pure sand that we're planting these succulents in, but these will allow for good drainage. So here we've got our succulent. We're going to go ahead and get our roots in there. And I'm just using my hands to kind of maneuver that. The thing is you don't want to bury the plant. You just want to bury the roots and let the plant rest above the soil line. So there we have it. You can see here we have another one that has been laying, and it actually rooted on the side of it there. So while the plant will be laying down, the roots will be going down into the media, and we've got plenty of new growth that's coming up out of it. You can also use a large tea kitchen spoon will help you move that material around that plant as well. The other thing is, when you're digging in an old succulent garden bed, you want to be careful with your hands. Make sure you're wearing gloves, or use a stick to kind of dig around in those roots, because there can be a lot of old spikes that still remain in the soil that can get into your hands. So this one, you can see it broke off the top, and this is actually the top of it. And we can plant both of these because they've both calloused over. This one does have a root system, and this one will develop a root system when we plant it in here. Now, the other thing is we're going to finish planting this one up. You can see it's got quite a root system on it. And we're just going to dig a hole and put that in here. Again, being careful not to bury the plant, just the roots themselves. We've got a little extra that I'll fill in with that. The nice thing about this material is it's heavy, and that's an important part because, again, these succulents tend to have a lot of moisture in them. So now that we have this planted up, we are going to give it just a little bit of a drink. Overwatering cactus is one of the main reasons why they die on us, and in the wintertime they're really not growing that much, so you don't want to water them that often at all. If you do see the leaves start to shrivel, then that's a sign that they may need more water. Now that we have it watered, we're going to take it and put it in a sunny location. Typically when you're transplanting cacti, you don't want to put them in full sun outside right away to allow them to establish those roots. But because we're moving them indoors in a full sunny window is a little bit less light than what they would be receiving outside. So hopefully this has helped you figure out how to handle this spiny task. Get some barbecue tongs, some moving blankets, some rose gloves, and all of those will help this task be a little bit smoother. To be said to let your soil rest occasionally, but since about the Dust Bowl, soil scientists have realized that you don't want to let your soil rest. In fact, what you're really doing is kind of starving your soil. We need to feed our soil, or more importantly, we need to feed the bacteria and the organisms that live in a healthy soil. Anytime we have bare soil like this, it's prone to erosion either by wind or water. You can see this summer on our Hugelkultur that you may remember us building this spring, we've layered logs and compost and soil and other shrubs and sticks to make this Hugelkultur in order to build our soil. And last spring we planted some cucurbits. You can see that there are still some growing that have helped cover that soil. We've also, because we were dealing with just organic matter, had a lot of weed seeds growing. We've killed out those weeds now, and you can see we also have some mushrooms growing, and that's a good sign. That means that all that organic matter is starting to decompose, because mushrooms are decomposers out in nature. So in order to prevent erosion this winter, we want to make sure that we're continuing to feed our soil, and the best way to do that is keep something living in it. This winter, we're going to put crimson clover on our Hugelkultur. So we've got about 7 ounces here measured out that we're going to spread all over this. And we selected crimson clover because it is somewhat drought tolerant as well as shade tolerant. And you can see that we are, while it's on the west side, we do have a large grove of trees next to us here. All summer long, we never watered this, and we don't intend to water it this winter. So we think this will make a good cover crop. More importantly, clover is a legume, which means it fixes nitrogen. We've purchased a pre-inoculated crimson clover seed, and if you don't have yours already inoculated, you want to make sure to do this, especially if you're planting it in a location that has not previously had legumes in it. This will allow that beneficial bacteria to be in there with the legume to ensure that it fixes the nitrogen. And it works with a rhizobial bacteria in order to do this. And what that means is it actually pulls atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and down into the roots, making it more available to plants. The nice thing about this is we need more nitrogen in our Hugelkultur because currently the nitrogen tends to get tied up as we are decomposing that carbon material. So the more nitrogen we can put in here, the better. Now, the nitrogen that you get from legumes is different than synthetic nitrogen. This is a slower process. So when this clover grows this winter, next spring it will start to bloom, and that's when we'll incorporate it into this Hugelkultur, adding more organic matter. So we're gonna just kind of scatter this seed throughout this Hugelkultur. And with a rake, then I will kind of gently work it in a little bit. It doesn't need to be worked in too much. And I'll continue this around the rest of the Hugelkultur. Now in our ornamental crops garden, we actually used winter rye as a cover crop. Winter rye is also a great cover crop, as well as hairy vetch and Austrian snow peas. For more information on winter cover crops, check out this fact sheet.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. Next week on Oklahoma Gardening, we look at a couple of unique keyhole garden designs in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We plant a tree in the garden, and we enjoy some fall color in the landscape. So join us then for more TV You'll Grow to Love. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We wish to thank our generous underwriters, TLC Garden Centers, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, and the Oklahoma Horticultural Society. We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.